The unlearning process is probably one of the most difficult parts of growth. And I'm talking of growth in any form, not just growth about spirituality or growth about your sense of self or anything of that sort, but just growth in general. Because you see why. If you don't recognize that what you've believed to be true, let's rephrase that. Let's assume you've got a problem you want to solve and you're struggling to solve that problem. Now, the only way you're going to get to solve that problem is to develop a better understanding of the problem. But you won't know what that better understanding should look like because it's new to you. It's a problem. It's something that you haven't encountered before. If you encountered it before and you were able to resolve it previously, then you'll have a very good idea of how to approach it this time to be able to resolve it this time. So generally, when we're facing a problem that can't be solved, it means that it's different to what we experienced in the past. And if we're going to insist on trying to shape and force a solution on it because that solution worked in the past, we create anxiety for ourselves. We create stress and duress for ourselves. So the unlearning process in this means that for me to be able to see things differently, I have to reconsider what I believe to be true about what I'm looking at. Think about that. If I hold on to the belief that I've always had about what the problem is about, I'll always be trying to solve that problem that I think it is, not realizing that there's other contributing factors that means that the problem is very different to what I assume it to be. And if I don't stop to consider that, I will then continuously try to solve the wrong problem or try to solve a version of the problem that isn't the entire picture, and that will frustrate me and convince me of all sorts of things about what it is that I can do, achieve, or what life is in store for me, or what I can look forward to, all of those things. So, the reason why people struggle to do this, to take a fresh perspective, is because they're too invested in how they feel about something. They're so invested in that need for justice, that need for answers, that need to be seen, to be heard, to be whatever, that they're not willing to let go of that because they believe in if they let go of that expectation or that legitimate need that they have, then that means they're giving up or they're letting people get away with things or something along those lines. And that's our blind spot, because we're working with the assumption that the way we see something and why we need it, we're working with the assumption that that is properly, correctly informed. But it obviously isn't. And I say it obviously isn't because if it was correctly informed, we'd know how to solve it. Because remember, the solution to a problem lies in understanding the problem well enough. It's not in knowing what the solution should be. I'll say that again because it's really important. It's such a fundamental of problem solving that I just can't for the life of me understand why it is not something that was more emphasized in school as well, or just generally. The key to solving a problem is in understanding the problem well enough. It's not in knowing what the solution should be. So if you're struggling to solve any problem, it means that you don't understand the problem well enough. Now, if you're going to hold on to everything you believe to be true about that problem and it's still not being solved, then you're holding on to things, into beliefs and perspectives that are literally getting in the way of your solution. So what you have to do is you have to step back and test your assumptions and your perspectives and what you believe to be true. You have to test it to see, is it still valid? Does it actually add up to what it is that you're experiencing or observing? And this is where it gets difficult, especially when it comes to the mental health space. I hate using the term mental health because it's more about emotional well-being. It's not about mental health, right? Because mental versus emotional, it's two completely different experiences as a human. But our duress and our stress and everything else is associated with our emotional well-being, with how we feel about things, not how we think about things. So we just need to keep that in mind as we go along. So our emotional well-being, our mental health, if we want to call it that, is dependent on our perspective and how well-informed that perspective is. Now here's where it gets really interesting. For the most part, our perspectives about life and about ourselves, the fundamentals of it was established during our formative years, right? And there's a lot of supporting evidence for this, a lot of supporting observations, a lot of supporting research, whatever. The point is, it's in that earliest years when we initially became aware of our place in the world around us, our significance to the people around us, and what we could reasonably expect from life and from those around us. It was then that our views about how life works were formed initially. And then the rest of our lives beyond that point was just embellishing that. It was just to add to it, to add to the body of knowledge of what we believe to be true. So here's the question then that we need to consider, is that if our sense of self was informed at such an early age, and we going through life now as adults or as grown-ups or as teenagers even, and we believe that who we are is who we are because this is just the way I am, this is my personality, or this is my character, this is how I've always been, so you must just learn to accept me for who I am. What you're literally doing is you're placing absolute trust in the observations and assumptions and conclusions of a child. You're literally taking your truths that you experienced as a child and you're trusting it for the rest of your life. That's crazy. And we don't ever think about that because that's what we need to unlearn. You see, it's like I explained in one of the previous episodes, but I'll touch on it again because it's a really important realization. We lose our innocence, we lose our sense of trust in the world around us, that absolute trust that we had when we were just born. We lose that sense of trust when we first become aware of the fact that not everyone laughs with us. A lot of people laugh at us. When we believe that not everyone sees us innocently, some people see us mockingly. Some people see us as unimportant or as irrelevant or insignificant. And it's that realization, and it's a feeling, right? Because in your formative years, you don't have the mindfulness to be able to deliberately process what it is that you're feeling. So that feeling you get about whether you were accepted, rejected, loved, nurtured, or abandoned, or betrayed, or pushed aside, or neglected, all of those things, it's how you interpreted what that meant about what you could expect from the people around you. And that's what you start building up on through the years. So, for example, if you had what a lot of people refer to as childhood trauma, if you had childhood trauma, then what you took from the traumatic experience becomes that truth about what you believe to be true about yourself or about life or about what you can trust in others for you. And that's why the unlearning process is so important. Because if you trust that the way you experienced it at that time in your life, when you were innocent, when you didn't have the awareness to understand what was going on, or when you didn't have the means to be able to challenge or push back or resist or avoid or escape, all of those things, if you're going to trust that how you felt is an accurate reflection of how the world works, of what your place in the world is, about what it is that you can expect from others, you are literally trusting the emotional experience of a child to inform your sense of self as an adult. And that can be quite daunting to revisit, because a lot of times we have the impact of trauma long after the event because of what we're still judging ourselves about, what we're still judging others about, what we're still enraged about, and all of those sorts of things. And it's not to say that you don't have a right to it or not. It's not about whether you have a right or not. It's about what you want to do with it. It's about where you're heading rather than where you're coming from. Who do you want to be rather than who do you have to be because you don't know what I've been through. And when we start looking at life that way, things get a lot simpler. Because for starters, you don't feel as if you're obliged to reconcile every experience in the past before you can have peace. Similar to the question I asked in the previous episode, I think it was, where I said, what does healing look like? We're so focused on wanting to heal, but we don't even know what healing looks like, especially if it's a childhood-related experience. You don't have a presence of mind, a conscious recollection or understanding of what life feels like before that, or in the absence of that. So what does healing look like? Is healing the absence of anger? Because then you can do anger management exercises, which doesn't work. It's not sustainable, because at some point you'll get angry again about something for a completely different reason from what you thought. was going to make you angry, and then you'll find yourself back in square one. That's why coping exercises and methods and tools and that it's foolhardy. It doesn't give you sustainable outcomes. So back to the unlearning thing. If you don't recognize that you might have developed these tools and methods and habits that has held you in good stead, because it's allowed you to be able to navigate life and to be functional under stress or duress, you won't realize that that is what's anchoring you in a past experience. Because we learn those based on the context within which we experience something. And I hope this is making sense, because this is a really fundamental perspective shift that is needed if we're going to have a healthier view of what lies ahead and what's possible. So to have that kind of mindfulness, you have to develop the ability to observe your thoughts, not to always react to your thoughts. To observe your emotions, not to react to it. Not to feel a need to honor your emotions and get others to respect your emotions. It's about being able to take account, take stock, reflect, introspect, understand why it is that you feel that way, and then consciously considering if the way you feel about it is really the best way to deal with it. And if it's still warranted at this point in your life, if it was something that affected you at a much earlier time in your life. And these are the kinds of questions and introspections and reflections that you can do on your own. You don't have to go to a therapist or a coach or a whoever to be able to do this. It's about reflection, honest reflection. And that honest reflection gives you an opportunity to revisit things from an objective perspective, to see it for what it was, to see your innocence or to see your warranted ignorance, the fact that you didn't know what you didn't know, or you had no way of knowing. All of those things are what matters, because that's what it is that allows us to be able to move beyond things, is to recognize that, okay, the reason why I made a bad decision is because I didn't know certain things at the time, or because I believed certain things to be true at the time, and I only discovered later that it wasn't. Or there was something that was true at the time, and there was no way to predict that what was true was going to change overnight. That's what we need to be able to look at, is not to look at the if-onlys and the what-ifs. That's a waste of time. That's a waste of life. It's a waste of emotional capacity, and it's a waste of your intellectual headspace. What you have to do is look at, for everything that was true in that moment, why was it not possible for you to have made a better decision? And when I say why was it not possible for you to have made a better decision, I'm saying that relative to how you felt, what blind spots you had, what your emotions were charged by, and what that caused you to direct your attention to, all of those things, that's what you need to understand. It might have been a silly thing to do at the time, but you can understand why you were silly at the time. It might have been a reckless or a naive thing to do at the time, but you must understand why. Why is it that your anger about something unrelated drove you to be reckless, throw caution to the wind, trust the person that you shouldn't have trusted because you didn't realize what it is that they were looking for that went against what you were looking for, and you only discovered it later on? That's the kind of grounded thinking and observation and reflection that we need to have to be able to unlearn the patterns and the methods and the habits and the beliefs that have gotten us to the point where we now feel duressed and we need to go on a healing journey. And I'm not mocking the healing journey or anything of that sort. But if you think about it, every single one of us are in some way or another healing from the last bad experience in life. But if you define your entire life around recovering from that bad experience, then what about the rest of the life that you have available to you now? How much of that are you appreciating? Because remember, more often than not, the bad decisions we made in our life is because there were certain things that we didn't truly appreciate the value of, right? Think about this. There was things that we thought was diminished in value or importance because it just didn't seem like a priority at the time, because that's not what we were looking for. And that's the point right there, is that It's recognizing why you were looking for what you were looking for that caused you to make certain decisions, that caused you to choose certain paths, certain relationships, certain scenarios or instances or experiences. And once you can understand why you did that, you then have something to work with. The thing that you won't necessarily be able to figure out yourself, because remember, it's an introspection, it's a reflection process. So the thing that you won't be able to figure out yourself is, why is it that someone else behaved the way they did? Because when we on the receiving end of someone else's behavior, we automatically assume that they're behaving that way towards us because of what they think of us in that moment. And that's why it hurts. That's why trust is broken. That's why we feel betrayed or abandoned or rejected or abused. Is because we believe that that person is doing it to us, knowing that they're doing it to us. But we don't consider that what drove them was what it is that they were in their own way triggered or incensed by something that we represented at that point. Because that's what gets people behaving badly more than anything else ever, is the expectations that they are resisting. Think about the last time you acted out, and you'll see that there was a strong component in there of how it is that someone expected you to be quiet about something that you didn't want to, or they expected you to accept something that you didn't want to accept, or they expected you to deal with something that you thought was unfair for you to have to deal with it, etc. So when we talk of expectations, don't only focus on what your expectations were of others. Try to understand what it is that gave them reason to have that expectation of us, or why it is that them having that expectation of us caused us to react so strongly or so negatively, or however it is that we reacted. Because that's what causes problems in relationships, is people's expectations not well informed of each other, and that's why they make incorrect assumptions about why they're being treated the way they do, or why it is that they just can never see eye to eye on certain things. It's because of perspective. And if you don't set out to try to understand each other's perspectives, you're not going to arrive at healthy outcomes. That even if you disagree, you'll have a good reason to disagree without it being a personal attack, or without it being something that is obstructive or destructive. You'll be able to make peace with the fact that, okay, we understand why it is that that just won't work for us. And then you go your own way. And that's how it works, right? And the more we start coming to terms with this side of things, the more we start coming to terms with how it is that things played out, the less impact it continues to have with us after it's played out. Because every single time that something bad happens, the first question that we ask ourselves is, why? And it's that why that we can't answer that causes us to develop a sense of stress and emotional duress and mental clutter, because we parked it in the back of our minds, mulling over it until we realize that mulling over it is not getting us anywhere, but we still can't let go of it because it's too important, we need to understand it and all of that. And then we hold on to that in the back of our minds while we continue being functional. And the more you accumulate those kinds of unanswered questions, the more your mental clutter builds up, the more the mental fog sets in, the more the distractions come into play, and the more you end up then making even more bad decisions, or you avoid making decisions because you just can't trust yourself anymore. Unlearning all of that requires visibility of all of that. Unlearning bad habits requires visibility of the fact that you may have a bad habit, that your exercises and your methods and your tools might be outdated. It might have exceeded its shelf life, so to speak, because it might have served its purpose at a certain point in time. But that point in time, life was very different. It was of a significantly lesser complexity. There were different role players involved. There were different themes at play in your life. So that's why you need to be careful about trusting that this is who I am. Because if you knew who you were, you'd be able to navigate life easy. Because you'll know exactly what is good for you, what is not good for you, why it's good for you, why it's not good for you, what you want to be rather than what you have to be. And you'll just make well-informed decisions about all of these because you know who you are. But it's because you don't know who you are that you need others to create space for you and to accommodate you and to make excuses for your behavior. Because you can't help yourself, so you need them to be kind, to recognize that you're trying your best. And we're all trying our best. Even the ones that come up and show up in the most ridiculous ways, the most obstructive ways, the most unhealthy ways. That's their best in that moment. But why it is that they don't realize they are capable of better than that is the answer that we need to find. That's the question we need to answer. So, unlearn what you've accepted as truths in your life. And especially consider what it is that you've taken from events and incidents and experiences that are long ago past. Consider why it is that something like that is something that still keeps you in a state where you're preempting every single time in your life in some form or another. You're preempting how it is that you need to protect yourself from that, or you need to be prepared for that again. And that's how you go on losing the present moment. Because remember, as long as you have unanswered questions of why, and that becomes debilitating or that overwhelms your senses or your consciousness, and that's what you end up dwelling on most of the time, that becomes the themes that you then go on alert about. You're going to go through life looking for all of those themes. You're going to be looking for the next person that's going to remind you of the last person that betrayed you. You're going to be looking for habits of someone who reminds you of someone that you might have been close to. And you might think that there's an enduring spirit here or something of the other. And that's how you convince yourself that you've got soulmates and kindred spirits and all sorts of things. And you convince yourself about how it's true love because you've never felt this way before and all of that. If you can't understand what is so amazing about the experience, and you just trust your gut and you trust your emotions because it feels right, so it must be right, you're setting yourself up for pain, a lot of pain. Because that becomes almost like your holy grail, your sacred trust that you are now placing in someone else's hands. And if they don't treat it delicately and with care and with honor and reverence, then it's going to feel as if it's them taking you for granted. And then that's how we end up with this internal narrative that says that if we were important enough, they wouldn't have done that to us. If we were important enough, they wouldn't have treated us like that. If we were important enough, they wouldn't have abused us. No, it's not about us. Everyone has their own demons. And if we don't recognize that people who have their own demons end up being distracted by those demons in how it is that they treat us, in their mind, because of the demons they're dealing with, it feels as if they are justified in doing that because their assumptions, their perspectives, their view of what it looks like in that moment, they're convinced it's true. And that's why we need to also be convinced about our truth. We need to test it. We need to be true to it. We need to hold ourselves accountable. And you can't hold yourself accountable if you don't have time to reflect on who you are, why you are that way, why you feel the way you do, why you're triggered by certain things, why some things are such an annoyance that you can't help the way you react to it. You need to answer those questions for yourself. Someone can point you in the right direction of how to reflect on it or what to consider, but the final answer, only you're capable of it because only you know what it is that you took from a previous experience. And let's assume for whatever reason you don't have an opportunity to reflect on that, or you don't know where it came from, you just feel it's just you've always been this way your entire life. That still doesn't mean that you can't move on from it, because to unlearn in that moment, in that way, you need to be mindful in that moment about, well, this is how I feel about it. I feel strongly about this scenario or this thing, and I've always felt strongly about this thing. And then you have to consciously question, well, is it really as important as I've always thought it was? Is it really as central to everything that's important to me as I always thought it was? Am I really going to be out of shape if I don't have a certain thing or a certain someone in my life? There's no shortage of experiences in every one of our lives where we thought we'd never be able to cope if that happened. And some way or another, something happened that we never ever thought we'd be able to deal with. And in hindsight, we look back and we think, hey, here we are. It happened. It wasn't nice. It wasn't pleasant. But we pushed on. How did we push on? We might not know, because we were in reaction mode. We were just surviving. We were just coping. And we never ever stopped to consider, well, why did we handle it that way? Why did it affect us that way? How did we find ourselves in that situation? Reconcile, debrief, find peace with it. Give yourself something tangible to work with. Because if you don't, you're going to need tools. You're going to need methods. You're going to need someone to define solutions for you. And that leads to one of the biggest losses ever, which is when you lose sight of the fact that you are capable of figuring things out. When you lose sight of the fact that if you are aware of what you're dealing with, you'll know how you want to deal with it, or you'll know where to look to find the answers or get the support that you need to deal with it. But first, you must be willing to take ownership of what you're seeing in front of you that you're dealing with. You must be willing to take ownership for who you are and why you are that way. And it's not that you must have all the answers. It's about you must be able to reclaim your agency, reclaim your will, your conscious choice to want to decide what is or isn't good for you. And if there's extenuating circumstances because things might be larger than life, it might be matters of spirituality or faith, then you need to make peace with what it is that you're willing to surrender to, because you choose to surrender to it, not because you have to or else. And you might choose to surrender to certain things because you trust that even though you don't know why now, you trust that you will find out later why it is important. And that's what happens when we establish the credibility of the source of what we trust. If you establish credibility of the source of what you trust, then when you get to a point where you don't understand necessarily why it is that that source is directing you in a certain way, you'll trust them because you know that their knowledge or whatever it is you're getting from that source, you'll trust that that is beneficial for you. So unlearning is something that trips us up because we don't realize how invested we are in who we are while we are desperately trying to be someone else. So if you want to be a better version of yourself, you have to be willing to let go of what created the version of who you were yesterday. Because if you don't, you're literally holding yourself in that holding pattern, going in circles, hoping that at some point something's going to land for you. It's not going to. You can't keep repeating the same thing and expect a different outcome. The only time a different outcome will happen is if something outside of your control changes and disrupts the cycle you're in. And if you didn't realize that you were in that cycle, it will feel as if your reality was shaken. And when it feels like your reality was shaken, you're going to be left in what they like to call an existential crisis. You're going to be left questioning everything about life and what you took safety from and what you took comfort from, because you were so invested in your comfort zone that you didn't prepare yourself for being adaptable. You have the ability to figure things out, and the primary ingredient needed for you to be able to figure things out is your awareness of what you're dealing with. The more aware you are, the more capable you become. Because by default, if you are aware of a lot of things, you'll know what you need to do for a lot of things. If you are only aware of a little bit, and there's a whole lot of other things that are influencing how it is that you're experiencing that time of your life or that period in your life or that experience in your life, then you're going to feel like you're out of control because you don't understand how it's all coming together. And that's exactly the same thing about the past. We feel powerless because of the experiences of the past, simply because we have no way of knowing how we're going to be able to protect ourselves or choose better so that we don't end up in a similar situation that we did in the past. And right there, in a nutshell, is the answer to how you can reconcile and move beyond traumatic experiences. Stop overcomplicating life. Stop looking for tools and for methods. Those will give you interim relief at best. It will not give you sustainable outcomes. Because sustainable outcomes require adaptability, because life is changing, life is happening all the time. Even if you sit in the corner of a dark room and ignore everything around you, you are changing in that way because you are growing accustomed to being in that corner in a dark room while the world around you keeps moving. You can't prevent change. You can't avoid it either. So trying to protect yourself from change is just an exercise in futility. Allow yourself to unlearn, to give up on things that you might have been invested in for so long without realizing that your reason for being invested in it, that reason expired a long time ago. Allow yourself to get a fresh perspective of your life now so that you can plot from where you are to where you want to be without feeling as if you're giving up things. It's not about letting go of stuff. It's about investing in what you want to create, what you want to grow, and what you don't want anymore. It will just die a natural death because you're not investing time and energy in it anymore. So if you're struggling with letting go, don't. Because when you focus on letting go, you're focusing on what it is that's holding you back, that's weighing you down. The more you focus on it, the more you keep it alive, the more you keep it relevant. So please, question who you are, why you are who you are, and how you got to this point in your life. And do it meaningfully, do it kindly, do it with purpose, do it with conviction. And what you start discovering in that, look for answers to it. Try to connect the dots. Don't just accept things blindly because someone says so. Don't accept that you are who you are because you heard someone say that they experienced a similar thing and affected them the same way, so that's why it's okay for you to be this way. Don't accept that. We're all unique. We all take things differently. We all experience things differently. Even if we're two people looking at the same thing, we'll take different lessons from it. So allow yourself to be unique instead of trying to apply someone else's solutions in your life. I'll repeat, you don't need methods. You don't need habits. You don't need tools. You will know how to define those in response to your specific needs when you understand what it is that you're dealing with and how you want to deal with it. And how you want to deal with it will be informed by your intrinsic, your innate value system, the principles you want to live by. That's what will inform how it is that you want to do it. And you'll know what that is when you know what you're dealing with. That's the part you've got to trust. You've got to trust the process of discovering who you are so that when you discover that, you'll know what you want to do about it so that you can take yourself to the next level. Don't wait for a guru to tell you how you must go to the next level. Reflection, introspection, it's horribly underutilized as skills that we have. And meditation is not reflection. Meditation is not introspection. Meditation is not mindfulness. Meditation only allows you to create space for all of that. I hope that was of value, and I hope that it gives you food for thought so that you trust the process of unlearning more than you trust the process of trying to adopt new methods and habits and tools and techniques and all of that. You don't need that. You're a human. You're not a business process. You're not a robot. You don't need to load a new software program. All you need to do is understand yourself. Take care.